FNAF 1 came out a decade ago, and we still don't have a definitive answer on when it takes place. Some of the other games do. FNAF 2 we know for a fact happens from November 8th to November 13th in 1987. FNAF 3 we don't know exactly, but it at least heavily implies it takes place 30 years after a place closes down, so we can kind of move it around. But FNAF 1 doesn't have either of these things. The best we've been able to do is just come up with speculation and roughly guess where it is, let alone the year. But of course, something came out recently that changes all of that. And of course, that thing I'm talking about is the new FNAF book the week before. With it, I think we've got a pretty good argument for an exact year of when Five Nights at Freddy's 1 takes place. So Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So to start, what exactly do we know about FNAF 1's placement relative to the other games? Less so a year placement and more so an order of events. Well, like I mentioned, we know that it takes place after FNAF 2 and before FNAF 3. For FNAF 2, it ends saying that the toys will be scrapped, but the originals will be kept to hopefully be used in the future, this being that future. Furthermore, we get paid less than we do in FNAF 1, implying that inflation had slowly risen wages over the gap. Furthermore, and this is technically speculation, but it's heavily suggested that the missing child incident took place in 1985. And in FNAF 1, the animatronic suits are already haunted. You better behave. I'm not trying to play right now. You want to play, don't you? Like I was saying, by the time of FNAF 1, the animatronics are already haunted. So this has to take place after the missing child incident. We also know that the missing child incident shut down the restaurant soon after. Combine all of that with the fact that on night 1, the phone guy says that these animatronics have been doing the same song and dance for 20 years, and we're pretty definitely certain it can't be that first restaurant. If it closes within the year after the missing child incident, but they've been singing and dancing for 20 years, something doesn't add up. So the game pretty definitively takes place after FNAF 2, as definitive as anything in this franchise can be. We also are pretty certain that it takes place before FNAF 3. FNAF 3 says on its Steam page that it takes place 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's closes its doors. Now, whether this is the original or FNAF 1, we're not really sure yet. Regardless, the whole premise of FNAF 3 is that the Freddy's brand is this kind of like urban legend status that's been closed forever. So it would make sense if FNAF 1 closed before FNAF 3. As far as for the other games and how they relate to FNAF 1, it's less clear. Well, at least before FNAF 3. Things like FNAF 6, Ultimate Custom Night, Security Breach, Help Wanted, those all take place after FNAF 3. The thing that's unclear here is Sister Location and also Follow Me. Follow Me being the minigame in FNAF 3 where the animatronics from FNAF 1 are inside a closed down FNAF 1, and one by one they are disassembled by William Afton until eventually he dies in a Springlock suit. And since Sister Location is so separate from everything else, it's just hard to place in general. What it really comes down to is what you think Follow Me is trying to tell us. If you think Molten MCI is true, or some variation of it, in other words, the original FNAF animatronics were melted down and used for experiments in Sister Location, if you believe that's true and Follow Me is where he gets them, then Follow Me and Sister Location have to take place before FNAF 1. But if you don't think that Follow Me is for that, then they can pretty much take place at any time. Me personally, I do believe in Molten MCI, but I also think Follow Me takes place after FNAF 1, so what gives? Well, in FNAF 2, we learn that the original animatronics are being used for spare parts for the toys, and it's my belief that those spare parts are still partially possessed by the missing child incident victims. So when they're moved over to the toys, that's why the toys start acting strangely. And at the end of FNAF 2, the originals are kept safe, but the toys are fully scrapped. So it's in my opinion that William melts down the toy animatronics first and uses them in order to do the Sister Location experiments. And then post FNAF 1, when he needs more remnant, he goes back to the then closed FNAF 1 and does Follow Me and then gets, spring-locked and dies. To put all this together, in my opinion, the order of the games here are FNAF 2, then FNAF 1, then Follow Me, then Sister Location, then FNAF 3. Is that definitive? No, but it's what I definitively believe in. That order in mind, we still don't have a year. Again, in FNAF 2, we know it's 1987, and FNAF 3, if it's 30 years after a closure, it's either 2015 or whenever FNAF 1 closes. Everything else, though, is up in the air, but there have been plenty of theories for FNAF 1's year specifically. So what are those theories? One of the more popular theories, especially because it was talked extensively about on Game Theory, is using minimum wage to figure that that out. FNAF 1 gives us a paycheck at the end of our week shift and an overtime payment at the end of the 6th night. So essentially, we get a paycheck for 5 days of a 6-hour shift. And they did the math on this. Look, I'm not a mathematician. They watch their video if you want the full method, but essentially they mathed it out and found that the closest link to minimum wage was 1993. And many people just assume that's correct. After all, it's within our established time slot after 1987 and sometime before 2015 the earliest, and it just kind of feels right, you know? And if you think it's loose evidence, sure, but there wasn't much to go directly against it, so why not? But again, that's not the only theory surrounding this. Another very popular one goes off of what Phone Guy tells us on night 1.
If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night too.
So if we listen to what Phone Guy, or as we now know, Ralph, says, that would mean that these suits have been in use for around 20 years. If that's true, well, we know Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened in 1983, which would place this game squarely in 2003 or later. Many people who believe this theory also believe that the pizzeria is closed by the time of FNAF 1, and we're just watching over a closed building like the FNAF movie suggests. That's not necessary for this theory, but they often go hand in hand. My preferred theory for finding the year of FNAF 1 is by going by the days of the week. In FNAF 2, we know the definitive dates that we are paid for our work. Damn, no one wants to hang out with me today. November 12th and an overtime payment on November 13th in 1987. Notably, that's Thursday the 12th and Friday the 13th. And I wouldn't doubt if Scott made the horror game happen on Friday the 13th on purpose. Regardless, if we are to assume that Fazbear's is a consistent company that pays their employees around the same day of the week every time, which 99% of companies do, then we have something to work with here. We know that Fazbear's pays their employees on Thursday the 12th, and you'll receive an overtime payment the day you work. So then it's very notable that in FNAF 1, we get 2 paychecks, and although we don't get a year, we get a date. November the 12th and November the 13th. If we assume that they're still paying the end of your shift on Thursday and an overtime payment on Friday, then all we have to do is find the Friday the 13th that have occurred in November after 1987, and we'll get a range of years. Doing this, you get the years 1992, 1998, and 2009. Obviously, some happen after 2009, but that gets really far away. And honestly, personally, 2009 feels a little too far removed and too soon to FNAF 3 for me to feel like it makes that much sense. Similarly, with 1992, it's really soon after 1987, and that also feels a little too quick. So personally, I'd been going along with the idea that FNAF 1 takes place in 1998. Admittedly, I don't have much evidence to suggest that of these 3 years, 98 is the correct one. It's more of a vibes-based thing. All those theories in mind, what new information could have shaken this up? Well, as always for this past month, The Week Before did. The Week Before is the newest FNAF book to come out of this franchise, and frankly, one of my favorites they've ever made. It's an interactive novel, which is a choose-your-own-adventure style book where you play as Ralph, the phone guy from FNAF 1 on his last week of work, the week directly before FNAF 1. Essentially, like the back of this book says, this is a direct prequel to Five Nights at Freddy's 1, one of the most unambiguously in-game timeline books we've ever received, and it is chock full of lore. So, spoilers ahead. Throughout the book, we've learned that Ralph has recorded a lot of voicemail messages for Freddy Fazbear's throughout the years. He's also worked with the company for a long time. In fact, he's recorded messages for not only the FNAF 1 location, but also the FNAF 2 location. I have reason to believe that this also extends to the original Freddy's location. After all, Phone Guy sounds the same in 1, 2, and the recordings found in 3, and I think this book is codifying that as purposeful. Anyway, throughout the true playthrough of this book, you record the messages we hear in FNAF 1. Not only that, but if you punch in 1987 in the voicemail receiver at some point in the story, you get to hear the FNAF 2 Night 5 phone call, in which it's changed. Every other message in this book is word for word correct with the games, but this FNAF 2 Night 5 phone call is slightly changed. First, I'll read you what the book says. It sounds familiar, then you recognize it as your own voice. You're listening to a recording you made some time ago for new employees. Someone has edited it. Hey, good job, Night 5. Keep a close eye on things tonight, okay? We don't have a replacement for your shift yet, but we're working on it. Well, just get through one more night. Hang in there. Good night. The book even mentions someone has edited it. Listen to the one we hear in FNAF 2.
Oh, hey, good job, Night 5. Hey, keep a close eye on things tonight, okay? From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, you know, especially concerning any previous employees. When we get it all sorted out, we may move you to the day shift. A position just became available. We don't have a replacement for your shift yet, but we're working on it. We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fred Bear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years, though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down. So just get through one more night. Hang in there. Good night.
This tells us a lot of things. For one, absolute confirmation that FNAF 2 takes place during FNAF 2. We're not going to an old pizzeria. After all, someone has edited that phone message since FNAF 2 before FNAF 1. But again, this is showing us that all of these voicemail messages are word for word true to the games. So all that to say, it's very interesting that on night 1, if you punch in the voicemail code, you can get this voicemail. You do so, and the message begins playing. It takes you a moment to realize you're listening to your own voice. Hello, welcome to your first security shift. I'm taping this message to help you get settled on your first night and prepare you for your new and exciting career path. First, here's a greeting from management. Welcome to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, where fantasy and fun come to life. Fazbear Entertainment is not responsible for damage to your property or person. Upon discovery of damage, or if death has occurred, a missing persons report will be filed within 90 days, or as soon as property and premises have been thoroughly, you hang up. You know the rest. It's strange to listen to a recording of yourself, especially one from so long ago. If you remember correctly, your daughter had just been born, a big reason why you couldn't take the night shift yourself at the time. The notable thing about this message is it does not match with FNAF 1, FNAF 2, or the recordings of FNAF 3. Don't get me wrong, the greeting from management, that's the same. But the lines, welcome to your first security shift. I'm taping this message to help you get settled on your first night and prepare you for your new and exciting career path, does not occur in FNAF 1, 2, or 3. This is unique to this voicemail. It is a voicemail we've never heard until now. And if we can find out when this voicemail was recorded, we will get a firm date for FNAF 1. Because like Ralph said, if you remember correctly, your daughter had just been born. And according to page 229, however, getting your 11-year-old daughter, that's all I needed to read there, 11 years old. This message was recorded 11 years before FNAF 1. So when was this message recorded? Realistically, in my opinion, the debate here is between the FNAF 2 location and the original Freddy's location. After all, he points out that this was so long ago and he was young and naive back then. So that, plus an 11-year gap, in my opinion, doesn't make that much sense to be the FNAF 1 Freddy's. Sure, it was probably open for a couple years, but more than a decade? This place is barely running at all times. However, outside of this information, we're a little lost at sea here. There's nothing here that really tells us which way this message goes, besides that it was probably either original Freddy's or FNAF 2 Freddy's. So instead, I think our best course of action is to go over those old theories that already have years that have some evidence backing them up. And if we can link up one of those years with this new evidence, suddenly we have corroborating evidence and a much stronger argument. So what years could possibly work? The theory going off of the fact that Ralph says these animatronics have been doing the same song and dance for 20 years gave us the year 2003. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to line up with the 11-year gap that we got. After all, 11 years would bring us back to 1992. And FNAF 2 definitely closes within 1987. So again, either the FNAF 1 location is open for more than a decade, or this one doesn't line up. It's possible, but we should move on to something that might give us more confirmed possibilities. The minimum wage method gave us the year 1993, and this one is a solid maybe, because 11 years before 1993 is 1982. And sure, that is a year before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza even opened, opening in 1983. But it's worthwhile to mention that he does state, if you recall correctly. So not only is the 11-year gap possibly, 1 or 2 years off, but if my daughter is 11 years old and I'm thinking about something that happened within her first 2 years of life, saying this is right after she was born isn't out of the picture here. So since it's only a year off, I'm willing to give 1993 some wiggle room. Currently, it's our best contender, but we'll move on to see if anything else fits the bill. The weekday method gave us 3 years to pick from: 1992, 1998, and 2009. 2009 gives us a similar but more severe issue that 2003 did. 11 years ago is sometime in the late 90s, and there's no real compelling evidence to say that FNAF 1, if it takes place in 2009, had been opened a decade prior. Just the same with 1992. It's like the minimum wage argument, but worse, because now it's taking us back to 1981, and we're getting further and further back from 1983, and I'm getting less and less generous with how much leeway Ralph's memory gives us. So which one do we have left? 1998. And isn't it interesting that exactly 11 years before 1998 is 1987, the exact year that FNAF 2 was open. If this message was recorded in 1987 at the FNAF 2 location, then this book would confirm that FNAF 1 takes place in 1998, corroborating the information of the days of the week that FNAF 2 gives us with the dates that FNAF 1 gives us. Which would mean this theory is stating that FNAF 1 Night 1 is exactly November 8th, 1998.
Isn't that what I said 5 minutes ago? But now it's proven.
But is it proven? Realistically, no. This is still heavy speculation and betting on the fact that Scott purposefully chose Friday the 13th and not just haphazardly. Not to mention, the 1993 minimum wage argument still works with this theory and the new information if you fudge the numbers a little bit. And since we're going off of Ralph's memory, which he remembers something's wrong in here, I think that's fair enough to say. So what do you think? There are a lot of mysteries in Five Nights at Freddy's that don't actually matter that much. Like, there are parts of this timeline that elude us even throughout this entire franchise that, even if we solved, wouldn't really help the major timeline in any way. It's just some cool side information at best. But regardless, a mystery is a mystery, and it's worth solving just for the sake of knowing if we can. So what would be a clear-cut, perfect example of this? A mystery that's 10 years old that we still have no clue on the actual answer to, but even if we solve it, it doesn't super change anything.
Was that the bite of 87?
Because, yeah, if we find out who did the bite of 87 and what the context was, will that solve the timeline? No. But it'll help flesh out our timelines when making one. So it's worth talking about, especially when new information comes to light that maybe solved it for us. And that new information is from, you guessed it, the week before. So, Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So, what do we actually know about the bite of 87? Well, first of all, it's mentioned in the very first FNAF game, on the very first night, in the very first phone call. So, it's literally one of the first mysteries of this entire franchise. But in that voicemail, Phone Guy, or Ralph as we now know, says this.
They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too. But then there was the bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know?
And this one line gives us a lot, and frankly, all of our information about the bite of 87. First of all, it happened in 1987, which pretty definitively makes it have to take place at the FNAF 2 location, because as far as we're aware, that was the only Freddy's restaurant open in that year. But furthermore, it must have happened during the day shift while the animatronics were free roaming. After all, this bite caused Fazbear to not allow the animatronics to free roam during the day anymore. Makes sense. We also know that this bite destroyed somebody's frontal lobe, but it didn't end up killing them. And that is kind of it. It's a lot of information, but that's all we have. So the question is, what animatronic did the bite of 87 and why? There's been plenty of speculation throughout the years, mainly when FNAF 2 came out. One of the most common theories is that Mangle is the culprit. Realistically, the main reason why Mangle is seen as a culprit for the bite of 87 is just the angle of her jump scare. I mean, he comes down from the ceiling and bites you in the forehead, which is where the frontal lobe is located. So I get it, it makes sense, and she has a massive jaw. But realistically, that is the only thing linking him to the bite of 87. Actually, some newer theories I've seen around is that Toy Chica is the culprit of the bite of 87. And this mainly comes from her Ultimate Custom Night dialogue lines, where she says,
"Where's my beak? Lodged in your forehead, of course."
And yeah, that's suspicious. Not to mention in FNAF 2, she removes her beak to expose her toothy mouth underneath. And Scott's even called attention to her removing her beak, so this might be why. So it's a decent theory, and besides these two, I've heard plenty of theories of pretty much every other FNAF 2 animatronic since the game's been out. Mainly because we really don't have any solid evidence linking a specific animatronic to the bite of 87, let alone a reason why. So what happened? What information has come out that leads us to a better conclusion? conclusion? Well, The Week Before was published. In case you missed last week's video, The Week Before is the first full volume in a new series of Five Nights at Freddy's interactive novels, FNAF's take on choose-your-own-adventure styled books. It follows the phone guy, or Ralph, in his last week of working at Freddy Fazbear's, after he's been transitioned to be a night shift security guard. It's a direct prequel to FNAF 1 and a really good book on its own right. I won't spoil too much of it today, so feel free to continue this video if you haven't read the book yet, but honestly you really should. The book is only like $10 to $12 depending on where you buy it, and it's a really good fun time. It's also packed with lore. But speaking of, what does this book say about the Bite of 87? Honestly, a good amount of direct information. Pretty early on too. On page 14, Ralph is thinking about the sorry state of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and he says, "The franchise has truly fallen on hard times thanks to those pernicious rumors about missing kids, and the lingering bad press from the Bite of 87. If only the victim could tell what he did to provoke that attack, but he doesn't talk anymore. Or do much else." Before we talk about what this means for the Bite of 87, I should address that this disproves one of my recent theories in a pretty major way. I've been of the belief that Cassie's dad is the protagonist of Help Wanted 2. Not only that, but I also believe he's the Bonnie bully. All of that is pretty agreeable, and I feel like a lot of people are on that train. I went a step further and suggested that he was also Jeremy Fitzgerald from FNAF 2. Therefore, he was the victim of the Bite of 87, and it messed with his memory. He forgot a lot of specifics, but he remembered that he loved Fazbear's, and that's why later in life he works at the Pizzaplex. But if this book is true, and after the Bite of 87 the victim doesn't talk or do much of anything anymore, doing all of Help Wanted 2 would be a little bit out of the victim's reach. Now, it is still technically possible, but I'm going to take this line as a pretty solid deconfirmation of Cassie's dad being the guy who worked at FNAF 2 who got bit in the Bite of 87. I do, however, still think he's the protagonist of Help Wanted 2 and the Bonnie bully. Anyway, what's interesting here is that Ralph mentioned that the victim provoked the attack. The way Ralph describes the victim here feels like the victim is an adult. After all, Ralph has a daughter and is generally very kind and caring when thinking and talking about kids. So to me, it would be really weird and callous and out of character for him to see this accident of a kid who lost their frontal lobe and then go on to blame the victim. The way Ralph talks here, it feels like he's talking about an adult that should have known better. Like, sure, it's still the fault of Fazbear's, but a lot less grace is given to adults when something like this would happen. But that's not the only piece of information we get that points to the victim being an adult. On page 29, Ralph mentions this anecdote. "But like you said in one of your training videos for the restaurant, you can't spell team without M and E. After the Bite of 87, you heard some of the staff twist that around to, you can't spell team without M-E-A-T. You didn't much appreciate that. People deal with tragedy and loss in their own ways, sometimes with humor. But hey, at least it shows they were listening during orientation." The fact that after the Bite of 87, the staff starts cracking jokes that their team is equivalent to meat, to me says that it was actually one of the staff members that was bitten. After all, if some random person got attacked by the animatronics, why would the team be meat here? There's another instance that helps to double down this interpretation on page 166. In the aftermath of the Bite of 87, staff spread tips around the restaurant of how to slow or stop the animatronics if they ever attacked again. You put a stop to those harmful rumors, once again earning the title of the Employee of the Month. Later on, one of the survival strategies suggested at the time was shining a bright light into the animatronics' eyes to disorient them and temporarily lock them in position until they reset their sensors and recalibrated their programming. And finally, that little trick might work on another animatronic, but Chica loves being in the spotlight, and she's about to make you part of a show you will never forget. He says that because we try it on Chica and we die because it didn't work. But this is particularly interesting to me. If staff members were sharing around rumors of how to protect yourself from animatronics, again, this lines up with the idea that one of the staff members was attacked. It's also notable that it mentions this flashlight technique would work on a different animatronic, just not Chica. There is one more somewhat lore impactful mention of the Bite of 87, because it's mentioned a few more times in this book, but just in passing. But on one of the endings, and I won't specify context for spoilers here, Freddy is looming over your face. And Ralph mentions, "You wonder what it will be like living without your frontal lobe." Which, for a second, leaves me to wonder if this book is implying Freddy did the Bite of 87. So, all in all, what is this information trying to tell us? That Freddy did it? I don't think so. At first, I thought it was a shoo-in, honestly, for Foxy. After all, in in FNAF 2, Withered Foxy is the only animatronic that can be fully stopped with the flashlight. Granted, every animatronic gets stunned for some time when being flashed with the flashlight, but specifically Foxy is the only one that it fully protects you from. So is there anything else in this book that could possibly lead us to Foxy being the true culprit of the Bite of 87? Well, yes. A couple weeks ago, I made a YouTube short talking about my findings related to the Bite of 87 in this book, and a lot of people in the comments mentioned I forgot something. One very clear piece of evidence that can further link Foxy to the Bite of 87, and I'm kicking myself for forgetting to put it in that short, because on the page that I kept notes on, this big huge page that I kept notes on, you probably can't see it in the lighting, literally the second note I left while reading through this book is page 18 was 87 Bite from Foxy, and I completely forgot to talk about what's said on page 18. So what is said on page 18? When talking about Foxy, we get everything about this animatronic screams not for kids, which is probably why his attraction has been marked out of order for the reopening. Though as far as you know, Mark, this is important. Though as far as you know, he's never bitten any kids, and kids is italicized. We're already pretty sure that the victim of the Bite of 87 was a staff member. Again, the staff members started comparing the team to meat, they were sharing ways to protect themselves, Ralph talks about the victim like they were an adult, and even in FNAF 2, the phone guy mentions, the phone guy was probably Ralph in FNAF 2 as well, but he mentions that the animatronics are perfectly fine with the kids, but they're staring and being weird and standoffish with the adults. Combine that with this sentence in the book that says he never bit any kids. One of my favorite things about the English language is that the sentence meaning changes depending on which word is stressed in that sentence, and the words kids here is stressed. Let me give you a different example. The sentence, I never said Fazbear killed those kids, has 7 different meanings depending on how it's said. I never said Fazbear killed those kids means that somebody else said it. I never said Fazbear killed those kids means that I thought it or wrote it, just didn't say it. I never said Fazbear killed those kids, meaning I said somebody else did. I never said Fazbear killed those kids means that I said Fazbear did something else to those kids. I never said Fazbear killed those kids means that I said Fazbear killed a different group of kids. And finally, most importantly, I never said Fazbear killed those kids means that I said the people Fazbear killed weren't kids. So the sentence from the book, although he never bit any kids, directly implies that Foxy did bite an adult. All this to say, the signs from this book, in my opinion, all point to Withered Foxy being the true culprit of the Bite of 87. Not only that, but we get the full context. During the day while the animatronics were free roaming, one of the staff members provoked Withered Foxy, and in return he bit him right on the head, destroying his frontal lobe and the reputation of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. After all, if Mangle's jump scare was good enough evidence to make them suspect number 1, what about Withered Foxy's jump scare? So is this confirmation that Withered Foxy is the culprit of the Bite of 87? Not really. There's very little ever confirmed in this franchise. But I will say, this, I think, is the most strong evidence we've ever had for a culprit of the Bite of 87. So moving forward, I'm just going to assume it was Withered Foxy until I'm proven otherwise. And really quick side note, this book also confirms the unwithered designs were never a thing. That being, the withered variants that look different from the classics actually looked different in the original Freddy Fazbear's. The book briefly touches on that the weird drastic change was from an attempt to redesign, like FNAF 2 suggests. They always looked like the originals. But what do you think? Have I convinced you on Withered Foxy, or do you still think somebody else did the Bite of 87? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Man, I've done like 3 videos on the week before. You'd think I'd run out of stuff to talk about by now, but I've still got more. This book is legitimately one of the most lore-dense things this series has ever received, but I'm definitely gonna need a break from this book soon. So what's the deal with the book today? Well, if you read into what it says about the FNAF 1 animatronics, a narrative about them starts to be highlighted, and that narrative might just bolster the theory Molten MCI. So what is that, and what narrative throughline am I talking about? Well, slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. We should probably start with Molten MCI, because a lot of these theory names kind of get thrown out there and I don't want to lose anybody. God forbid I just start saying things like PaperPal BV disproves Shatter Victim just to bolster Golden Trio. Especially if you consider Oswald Dad Bully pretty handily disproves Renner Bully, which then allows Renner SD, which makes way for Mystic Vanessa. Who knows what that's supposed to mean? I do, but I'm not mentally well. So let's take it back to Molten MCI. The theory essentially boils down to Molten Freddy being composed of the souls of the missing child incident victims. So how do we get there? FNAF 6 had an interesting but known roster of animatronics for the most part. Scraptrap is literally credited as William Afton in the game and the character encyclopedia, so that's pretty done and done. Scrap Baby looks a lot like a scrapped circus baby and sounds just like Elizabeth did back in Sister Location. And, you know, Henry says Elizabeth, so that's again pretty solid. Lefty on the surface seems strange, but looking at this render in the alleyway and the blueprints we get for the animatronic, it's pretty clear that Lefty is specifically built to capture and contain the marionette, which it seems to by the beginning of FNAF 6. All of these are pretty unambiguous. And then we get to Molten Freddy, this freak made out of wires and eyes. So what exactly are they? Well, we do have a sort of origin that came out just before FNAF 6. A conversation between the source code of scottgames.com and fnafworld.com. These websites were seemingly talking to each other, and we got this dialogue from it.
You are crowding us. Be quiet. You can't tell us what to do anymore. Yes, I can. You will do everything that I tell you to do. We outnumber you. That doesn't matter, dummy. We found a way to eject you. You would be lost without me. Haha! Say goodbye to our friend.
So who is this conversation between? Well, one of the speakers is almost definitely Circus Baby. The dialogue links up very closely to how Circus Baby talks to us, even down to calling us dummy.
Do you know why they call it the scooping room? It's because, dummy, this is the room where they use the scooper.
So if that's true, who did Circus Baby get ejected from? Well, we can assume and make inferences, but we don't even have to do that. Just track back to where Circus Baby was before FNAF 6. By the end of Sister Location, Circus Baby and all of the Fun Times had exited their exoskeletons and formed into one massive heap of endoskeleton, wires, and eyes, named Ennard. Ennard scooped out the insides of Michael Afton and wore him like a reverse Gundam. But before too long, Michael's body began to rot, so they had to exit the body and flee into the sewers. So we know that before FNAF 6, Circus Baby was MIA within a mass of wires and eyes. Sound familiar? If they were all one joint unit and Circus Baby was ejected from that unit, then what we would have left would be Molten Freddy, that mass of wires and eyes. Not to mention, haha, say goodbye to our friend lines up pretty well with the manic way that Molten Freddy talks in FNAF 6. So it's pretty definitive, obviously not confirmed, but you know, very rarely in this franchise ever is, but it's very definitive that Molten Freddy is the hobbled together remains of Ennard after Circus Baby was split off, aka the remains of the Funtime animatronics. So the question becomes, if Molten Freddy can be traced back to the Funtime animatronics, what makes up them? Well, that's where the debate for Molten Freddy really comes in. It seems pretty clear that either the Funtimes were horribly, terribly, incredibly poorly programmed, or they're haunted, they're possessed. Even within the Sister Location bunker, they're incredibly aggressive and willing to attack anything on sight, not to mention the way they talk after they escaped. So what is possessing the Funtime animatronics? Some people argue it's random children we never met. After all, the Funtimes were designed specifically to be perfect child kidnappers, and they're rented out to parties all the time. So it could be any of those kids from any of those parties. But the line "one big happy family" to me implies that Molten Freddy is a character we know that would know the Aftons. So if it is someone we know, well, there's a device that can help make that happen. The scooper in Sister Location is confirmed to also work as a remnant injector based off of the blueprints from FNAF 6. Real quick side note, in case anyone doesn't know, in Five Nights at Freddy's, remnant is specifically the mixture of soul or spiritual energy and metal. It can be melted down and manipulated in various ways. Typically, the spiritual energy or memory, what have you, is positive in nature, and Remnant has many positive abilities, like being able to heal. Regardless, if you melt it down, you can inject it into other larger metals, like animatronics, and have the spirit that was originally in the Remnant possess the new material. It's a way to transfer ghosts scientifically. In the third FNAF novel, The Fourth Closet, a naming convention that is never confusing, William Afton is explicitly injecting the remnant of the missing child incident victims into the Funtime animatronics. He literally melted the FNAF 1 animatronics into one large creature and is extracting remnant from it to inject into the Funtimes in order to better control and manipulate them. This isn't subtext, this is literally the text. The major question though is, does this happen in the games? After all, the Silver Eyes trilogy is not within the game's timeline, even though they share a similar world. Well, we don't have a definitive or confirmed source of the remnant in the Funtime animatronics, so what is my theory? It does have to go one step further back to FNAF 2. In FNAF 2, the original animatronics are kept in a back room and used for spare parts for the toys, the original animatronics being possessed by the missing child incident victims. It's my belief that the use of these spare parts into the toys transfers some of that spiritual energy, or remnant, into the toy animatronics, which is why they start acting strangely. After the events of FNAF 2, while the originals are kept in safekeeping, the toys are scrapped and are therefore unaccounted for. William Afton would then be able to take those for his own uses, aka melting down the toys and injecting them into the Funtimes. This is where the original MCI remnant would be added to the Funtimes, but it's my belief that at this point they are too animalistic and hard to control. After enough experiments, he decides he needs more. So we then cut later to after FNAF 1, when Freddy's is officially shut down for good. William sneaks into the restaurant and breaks into the safe room, giving himself a sort of buffer for the animatronics. Then, night after night, he leads an animatronic back, waits until they confuse their programming, and disassembles them, taking much of it back to the sister location bunker to melt down to add to the Funtimes. After several nights of this, much more of the MCI remnant has been added to the Funtimes, but they are still too hard to control. Well, going off of the movie and the books, William seems to think that the Spring Bonnie suit has some dominion over the missing child incident victims. So, on the 5th night, he goes back to that safe room to retrieve the Springlock suit. But it's in that night where he fails and dies within the Springlock suit, becoming Springtrap. This is the point, I believe, where sister location happens. The Funtime animatronics have grown restless and even more isolated until Michael Afton goes down to do what William couldn't finish. However, when he's down there, the Funtimes reunite into one mass, Ennard, and they use the scooper to empty out Michael and wear him out. But of course, Michael's body begins to rot and they have to escape into the sewers. And after enough time, the missing child incident victims have a revelation about Elizabeth Afton being in Ennard.
She doesn't even go here.
Do you even go to this school?
So they split up into Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, and then we have FNAF 6. So if that's my theory, what did The Week Before do to bolster it? Well, that comes down to the findings that Bronwyn Light shares with Ralph. In case anyone still isn't caught up, The Week Before is the newest book in the FNAF franchise. It's a choose-your-own-adventure style book set the week before FNAF 1. The back of the book pretty directly states that it takes place within the game's timeline. You play as Ralph, the phone guy, doing his week of a night shift on his last week of working at Freddy's. A junior reporter, Bronwyn Light, has also been investigating the FNAF 1 Freddy's location and gives her information to Ralph via a voicemail. According to Bronwyn, and in some of the endings we can play through, this proves to be true, the FNAF 1 animatronics have grown restless by this time, and they want nothing more than to get out of the pizzeria. They're tired of being stuck in here and they want to escape. Their plan is actually to redirect power to their charging pads, save up extra battery power, and just leave, never to come back. In fact, this book gives the animatronics a lot more intelligence and personality and intent than we've ever seen. But the question becomes, if the FNAF 1 animatronics are so desperate to leave the FNAF 1 Freddy's Pizzeria, is there any other examples of animatronics desperate to escape? Well, yes, directly in the Funtime animatronics. They were so desperate for freedom, they hollowed out somebody's body to hide inside of it to escape. And when that began to fall apart, they escaped to the sewers rather than come crawling back. So once again, we have animatronics that just want freedom. And with that in mind, a narrative throughline starts to form. So let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of horrors rise. For years, the missing child incident victims live on after their death, possessing the animatronic suits that their bodies rot inside of. But over the years, they've grown restless. They want freedom. They want something new. They want out. But freedom never comes. They get close once, but Ralph, one of the longest Fazbear employees, prevents them from doing so. And before they get another attempt, FNAF 1's Freddy Fazbear Pizza is shut down. And even in that moment, they're not offered rest or peace. William Afton comes back to collect, disassembling them and disrespecting them one last final time. For a moment, peace seems to be at hand, but they're trading one prison for a worse one, as they've been melted down one by one and injected into the fun times. Sure, they're rented out during the day and get to see the light then, but they're kept in an underground bunker, electrocuted and experimented on. They want out. They want out so badly, they hollow out Michael Afton and escape through his body, hoping to keep their cover for a bit, but his body rots too quickly. They make a break for the sewers. While at this time they're physically free, there's something still controlling them in Afton. Elizabeth Afton, thinking she can pilot the body as though she is the owner of it. They don't want to be controlled. They don't want to be led around on strings. They want out. This time, they eject her out, and they finally get a taste of true freedom. It's in the shadows and at night, but it's freedom. But that freedom is fleeting, for soon they're lured to the FNAF 6 location, a fake pizzeria built to hold and destroy them. And in that fire, their remnant and souls are finally laid to rest, but their agony remains. Agony that still, to this day, wants out. Agony that infests the burnt rubble and amasses the surrounding agony of the location, even more so when a pizzaplex is built on top of it. Eventually, that tangle of agony and anguish begins to lash out. It begins to attack anyone nearby, but even still, it wants out. And by the beginning of Ruin, we see that wish finally fulfilled, as the Tangle is escaping the pizzaplex that is now in ruin. They finally did it. They're out. The only question remains, for how long? I think this is one of the cleanest narratives that's emerged around the missing child incident victims. But what do you think? Are you still unconvinced on Molten MCI? After all, there's a lot to still explain about the animatronics themselves. There might even be something else attached to them, but I'll save that for another video. Yeah, I think it's time we talk in depth about FNAF World. This is frankly one of the most confusing games in the entire franchise. And that's saying something, because FNAF AR exists. When it first came out, it was bad and confusing. Then when it was re-released after the backlash, it was really fun and confusing. Is this a retelling of Happiest Day? Is this just FNAF's version of the afterlife? Has it even happened in the timeline yet? That's what we're going to try and figure out today. So slices, put on your aprons, and let's bake ourselves a theory. What actually happens in FNAF World? When booting up for the first time, you're greeted by this screen and the words, "Everything that happens out there has an effect here. Do you understand? This is a safe place. This is a sanctuary. But something has gone wrong, and now it can be seen here. Something went very wrong. That's why I'm here. But I won't let the same happen to you. I will put you back together." And suddenly, the game begins. Playing the game completely normally, you journey throughout the several lands of FNAF World, going through glitches and defeating bosses, eventually tackling the security system of the game to fix whatever error was in the code. And then you receive an ending. Now, the key here is that you receive an ending of several. Most of them are frankly just fun challenges and Easter eggs, but a few of the endings here really delve into the lore of the game, and those are the endings we'll be talking about today. 4 of them, to be specific. The simpler 2 endings to receive are the 4th glitch and the drowning ending. In FNAF World, you're directed to travel through glitches to get past impassable obstacles, but never to go too deep, as you may not be able to return. Well, going too deep is almost impossible, unless you go through a very specific sequence of events, finally able to go 4 glitches down and get stuck by this lake and a guy fishing there. He lets you know that he's old man consequences, and basically congratulates you on getting yourself stuck. The end plays and you get the ending for the 4th glitch. However, if you instead force your way deep enough into the lake, you glitch out of bounds once again, and are greeted with this image, giving you the drowning ending. What this means is heavily interpretive. Some people see it as an angel with wings, some people see it as a father with his arms on the backs of his 2 kids. It's hard to say, but maybe later on we can figure that out. The 3rd lore-heavy ending can be found in the Halloween update. This update added a lot of playable minigames, as well as the creator of those minigames, this guy at a desk. If you beat all of them in a specific sequence and then fight a secret boss, then visit him again, you get this ending. He lets us know that he's created something called Baby, that it's too late to stop her, and then suddenly he's found dead after some glowing eyes say,
"The show will begin momentarily. Everyone, please stay in your seats."
This feels pretty directly hinting towards Sister Location, and the game came out before Sister Location, the update right before it. So this feels like it's mostly just a way to hype up the game. But if so, who the hell is this guy? We'll get into that later too. Finally, the most intensive ending to get, the clock ending. Whenever you receive direction from Fredbear in this game, if you wait around long enough on the last text box, this happens. This glitched version of Fredbear directs you to, instead of completing the main story, seek out the clocks hidden throughout the game. Each time you do, you complete a very simple, arbitrary task. If you're all done and you unlock the last hidden area, you receive this cutscene and the game ends. Seemingly very related to the opening cutscene of FNAF World, this ending, along with this cutscene, feels like the main plot of the actual game. At least the main hidden lore of it. The question now becomes, well, what is that story about? Or, more accurately, the real question is, Rai, why the hell do you want to try to tackle this incredibly lore-messy game? Well, frankly, it wasn't technically my choice, because actually the wonderful channel members voted for it. I hosted a members-only poll for a few options for the next video, and overwhelmingly they voted for this one. So, here you go. I don't really advertise the membership much because I feel as though I don't provide enough for it. You do get a few bonus videos and posts like that occasionally, but it's not necessary. Don't feel like you have to, but thank you everyone, to the channel members, for the input and for the support. It means the world. And anyone who doesn't want to or can't, just thank you for being here. Really, it means a lot. Anyways, let's mix our ingredients together and see what kind of theories come out of it. I think it makes the most sense to tackle the non-clock endings first, as they have a few different interpretations that we can touch on, and hopefully when we tackle the clock ending, it can point us to one of those interpretations we figured out, and frankly, vice versa. The desk ending is both incredibly straightforward and incredibly confusing. Immediately, the bulk of this makes sense. Obviously, we're hinting towards Sister Location, obviously baby means Circus Baby, and obviously Circus Baby killed her creator. What? Now, okay, we don't technically know exactly who created the fun times. Like, sure, we're pretty sure it's William Afton because of the opening cutscene of Sister Location. However, Henry also alludes to the fact that he possibly made the fun times in FNAF 6. So not only are we not exactly clear on who would have made Baby, in either case, they should be alive. If the show's about to begin, supposedly we're not at Sister Location yet. Like, Sister Location hasn't happened. And both William and Henry are either alive before Sister Location in the case of Henry, or die in a back room via a spring lock suit like William Afton. Not by the hands of Circus Baby at a desk. We don't know anybody who would simultaneously be the creator of Circus Baby and be killed by Circus Baby at a desk. I'm sorry, am I getting too heated? This lore is very confusing. Even more confusing to all of this, the person also says they're the creator of all the mini games we're playing, because he said, you broke my games. Some people interpret this as Scott venting his frustrations that the fans are breaking through his games and this has already gone too far and it's going to enwrap him, but that feels out of character for Scott, like as a person. When something goes wrong in FNAF, Scott usually, oh, did you want to turn around or are you leaving me? Turn around? Love me? Is this really how you want to cuddle? Okay. No, you can't nuzzle the microphone. Well, if something goes wrong in FNAF, Scott usually tells us directly in a Reddit post or something, not esoterically in a video game that he knows we pick apart. This doesn't feel like Scott. This feels like a character we either haven't met or just a cool Easter egg that shows off the new game coming out. Although, on the bright side, either way, this doesn't really affect FNAF World, because this does feel like a separate thing to hype up Sister Location. I'm sure I could make a whole video trying to figure out who that guy is, but for now, we'll just say it's Desk Guy and move on. Now, onto the glitch endings. If you speak with this seemingly random fisherman in the deepest of 4 glitches, you're greeted with this dialogue. I'm sorry to say that you may have gone too deep into the code. There's no way back out. My name is Old Man Consequences. Come have a seat and let's fish for a while. You have nowhere else to go. The end. At which the text box doesn't close, and while you can move around a little bit, you can't actually leave that spot. You have to close the game. You went too deep. And that gives you the first of the 2 endings that you can get at this lake. Now, on a surface level, OMC just feels like a fun way for the game to show you that you went too deep. It's a little hidden Easter egg. And honestly, that might be it. It's possible that if FNAF World is a real game in universe, OMC is the built-in function to stop the player from actually breaking the game, and it just catches you when you go too deep and tells you to close the game and reopen it to reload back at your last save. Especially because while this does end the game, there's extra hidden lore here that doesn't feel intentional to the actual in-universe game if it exists. And that's if you glitch your way into the lake, going even deeper to a 5th glitch, falling out of the world like you do in many games when you go out of bounds, and going across this image. Again, just like Desk Guy, I hesitate to go along with the interpretation that this is a Scott self-insert. Some say that this is Scott and his, at the time, 2 children. But again, Scott knows that we dig into these games to get every little lore detail. So giving a shout out to his kids in a way that could be interpreted as lore feels too messy. He knows we'll see this differently. So I feel like it either has to be that Angel interpretation, or who knows, maybe at this point it's William and Elizabeth and Michael, because most likely we're dealing with Evan here, and we'll get into that. Or sorry, the crying child. Or maybe this is post-Springlock, and this is the soul of William Afton greeting the soul of his crying child and Elizabeth, but it's hard to tell. But that is more plausible than Scott. When talking about the clock endings, right away there are alarm bells ringing for the Happiest Day minigames of FNAF 3. After all, the tasks we have to perform are changed versions of the ways in which we access the Happiest Day minigames within FNAF 3. In FNAF 3, we click on the cupcakes on the cameras. FNAF World, we walk on them. In FNAF 3, we click on a rectangular poster of Balloon Boy. FNAF World, we put Balloon Boy in a rectangle. Arcade buttons, 4 buttons. Keypad, code. Shadow Bonnie, bunny. It all lines up. This is as direct as we get in this franchise. We are completing the steps that we did in FNAF 3 to access those Happiest Day minigames. The question becomes, why would a whole game be about that? We already did Happiest Day in FNAF 3. Why would we do it a second time? Did we actually do it a second time? Or is this a retelling? Typically, in a story, if something is repeated, it's either to emphasize it, to clarify it, or to retcon it. I don't think it's being retconned because it's very one-to-one, and I don't think it's meant to emphasize. Well, maybe. I think we're clarifying. I think FNAF World is attempting to give us more information about the FNAF 3 Happiest Day minigame and explain some things that go unexplained in FNAF 4. After all, Happiest Day is hard to decipher. I mean, what was some of this? I still don't understand the cupcake room, or why Shadow Bonnie is here. It's really odd. So what does FNAF World tell us about the Happiest Day minigame that FNAF 3 doesn't? Well, I think it's getting more explicit about who the Happiest Day is for. Look at the beginning and the end of the game again. Look familiar? If you know some lore about FNAF 4, it should. This dialogue and presentation echoes the ending cutscene of FNAF 4, where the Fredbear plush promises the crying child that we are still your friends and that we'll put him back together. This takes place right after the bite of 1983, wherein the crying child is lifted off the ground and put in the moving mouth of Fredbear, and due to the poor build quality of the animatronic and lack of safety measures around him, an accident occurs that ends up sending the crying child into a coma and later killing him. This was a tragic event, and I'm sure his family was hit very hard with it. Financially, it could have put them into ruin, although they could have been better off if they had better representation legally by today's sponsor, more. So going over the interpretations and the endings of this game, we have a recreation of the Happiest Day minigames, a callback to the FNAF 4 ending cutscene, with possible mentions of Henry or William or someone dying at the hands of Circus Baby. And maybe an angel? What is FNAF World trying to say? Well, I think a couple things. First off, in the original Happiest Day minigame, we don't know who it's for. We just see this crying kid. And sure, we can assume it's FNAF 4 because crying child, but it's not clear. For one, a good chunk of the community thinks that the Happiest Day is actually for Cassidy, mainly because of this picture from the security logbook, in which we see a puppet giving cake to a kid, like this puppet gave cake to this kid. Admittedly, I do see it. However, I think FNAF World is explicitly trying to tell us that Happiest Day is about the FNAF 4 crying child. This game seems to be attempting to give us more information on why and how the Happiest Day came to be, even when. This is given away by the fact that the final cutscene doesn't mention that any goal has been achieved, or that a child has come back or moved on. The line we see are the pieces are in place. Now rest. We're not completing the Happiest Day via FNAF World. We're helping to make it happen. There's one key question that's still lingering though. Who's doing this? Who's the player? And in answering that, when is this happening? Now, we're going to tread some pretty speculative waters here, but we have to, because honestly at this point, we've got all the information we can get, now we have to piece it together in the most logically and narratively satisfying way. So who could be behind this? As far as we're aware, there's two movers and shakers in the FNAF Afterlife. The FNAFterlife, if you will. First, Charlotte, Henry Emily's daughter, the Shepherd of Lost Souls, and currently possessing the marionette. Second, Cassidy, the one you should not have killed, the vengeful spirit, and currently possessing Golden Freddy, or Fredbear. As we play the Happiest Day minigames of FNAF 3, it seems fairly likely that Charlotte is the one orchestrating it. As in the last minigame, we play as a child wearing a puppet mask, she places the last cake, and she is the one that typically gives gifts and gives life. And that's pretty one-to-one. One question though, how did they arrange this? How is the game already glitched enough that they can interact with it? And how did the crying child get there? This is where I think Cassidy and FNAF World comes into play. How? Well, let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of horrors rise. In FNAF 3, we play as Michael Afton, guarding the haunted house attraction, Fazbear Frights. During the nights, we as the player do simple tasks in order to unlock minigames, eventually leading to the happiest day. But what is actually happening here? Surely Michael isn't touching posters through cameras or punching wall tiles like a keypad. I think FNAF World is trying to tell us that Michael is actually doing these actions, but not in the way we play them in FNAF 3. I think FNAF World is saying that when all the FNAF memorabilia is here, Charlie finds all the souls in one place, as well as the crying child, stuck. They can help him, but they need to get to him and set up an area to help him in. This is where Cassidy comes in. I believe that FNAF World is an actual in-universe game that is present somewhere in Fazbear Frights. Just like the several other arcade machines here, Cassidy is trying to make changes and affect this game to help Charlie and the others assist the crying child, but they need human input. They need a player. Cassidy reaches out to Michael through this copy of FNAF World and directs him on where to go and what to do. When we as a player are doing weird environmental interactions to access the Happiest Day minigames in FNAF 3, the actual thing that's happening is Michael setting the clocks within FNAF World. FNAF World isn't rewriting or retelling the Happiest Day minigames. It's retelling how Michael interacts with the environment within FNAF 3. This gives us an actual reason and method for Michael to assist in the passing on or indoctrination of his younger brother. He may have caused him to die, but at least now, he can help him instead. I know this is pretty out there for an interpretation, but frankly, most interpretations of FNAF World are. In case it got confusing as I really got into the weeds, the TLDW of this entire video is I think FNAF World is showing us what Michael Afton does in FNAF 3 to allow the Happiest Day minigame to occur, therefore implying that Happiest Day happens during FNAF 3 and not actually by pressing the tiles on the wall. Now, keep in mind, this also hinges on the fact that we know exactly who and what the Happiest Day minigame is. A lot of mystery still surrounds FNAF 2, or at least mystery for the motive behind the things that happened. For a lot of fans, FNAF 2 was the kicking off point for the deep and intense lore of this franchise, presenting death minigames like Save Them and Give Gifts, Give Life, and for the most part, we know what these events are. Give Gifts, Give Life seems to be the marionette assisting the missing child incident victims in possessing the animatronics. Give Cake to the Children seems to be William Afton killing Charlotte Emily, and Save Them seems to be another batch of children murdered at a Freddy's location, this time the FNAF 2 one. But here's the thing, we know what these events are, but the why is still a mystery to us, especially with something like Save Them, or what fans have been calling the Dead Child Incident, or DCI. All this time and we're still not 100% sure on how they died, why they died, and if their spirits possessed anything. And I think it's high time that somebody definitively solved with conclusive evidence what those answers are. Unfortunately, I don't know who that could be, so you're stuck with me giving my best guess. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. By the way, I'm using the same microphone, but I have a new interface which has a better preamp, so I had to redo all my audio settings, so if the audio sounds much better or much worse than it used to, let me know. I'm trying to readjust everything. Hopefully it should theoretically be better, but probably 80% of you won't notice because I'm just really picky about this shit. FNAF 2 itself is centered around the shortest ever open Freddy's location. We know from the newspaper at the end of the game that it was only open for a few short weeks in 1987. Trying to move past the bad PR of the missing child incident, this new Freddy Fazbear's toted additional security with intensive measures. The new toy animatronics literally had a criminal database that they could scan people's faces and compare with. Everything about this restaurant seemed like it was supposed to be the safest place your children could be, but literally within like a month that proved to be not true. The new animatronics would act strangely with adults staring at them for long periods of of time. Eventually, one of the animatronics attacked what seems to be an employee, severing their frontal lobe. And like I mentioned earlier, 5 kids end up getting killed and their bodies are strewn about the restaurant. We also know that someone used a spare yellow suit in the back and all the animatronics started going crazy. By the end of it, it shut down and the toys are scrapped. But it's mentioned that the original animatronics are kept in the hopes that they can reopen sometime in the future. So we know all of this, but like, we still don't know why any of that bad stuff happened. I think the Dead Child incident is the linchpin to this entire issue. If we can figure out why a bunch of kids died at the FNAF 2 location, then that context might help us answer a lot of the other questions we have about this situation. But the Dead Child incident is one of the weirdest parts of the lore for a lot of fans of this franchise. So much so that most fans just kind of gloss over it. The spirits don't seem to go anywhere unless you believe that they're possessing the toys, but that presents a whole nother slew of issues. After all, the toys are acting strangely on day 1, and it seems like the children were killed near the end of the week. But even if they did end up in the toys, we're not sure what happens to them after that, unless you believe that the FNAF 2 kids are what end up in Molten Freddy, but circumstantial evidence from FNAF 6 goes against that. It's just a whole confusing mess. So something that might help us get any more information is figuring out the motive, the why. Why did these children die? Well, let's go down our possible reasons list, starting with the animatronics themselves. We know that from the game itself and what Phone Guy tells us, the animatronics are getting more and more aggressive and unstable, and that there was supposed to be one last private party at the end of the week, before the place shuts down for the foreseeable future. So is it possible that these animatronics are so messed up that by the end of the week, during that private party, they just start flipping out and go on a rampage, killing anything that's too close? Ultimately, while possible, that seems unlikely. Granted, we have very little information on who these dead people are, and they might be adults, but it seems more likely that we're dealing with more dead children. And if they are children, that doesn't make much sense. The game states several times that the animatronics act fine around children. It's adults that they are standoffish and strange towards. Not to mention, in the Save Them minigame, while the dead children are strewn about the restaurant nearby animatronics, the animatronics don't seem to be attacking the children. They seem to not actually be interacting with those children at all. The only one that's moving outside of the puppet and Withered Freddy is Mangle, who's just kind of wandering around aimlessly. And the marionette and Freddy moving in and of itself goes against this idea. If the animatronics are the ones attacking the children, why did the marionette try to get Withered Freddy, another animatronic, to help save them? And another reason on top of all this is one of the endings of this minigame. If you follow the marionette correctly, eventually you'll encounter William Afton, who rushes you, and I guess like suplexes an animatronic. I don't know what he does to take down Withered Freddy, but he rushes you and the screen goes black, so he did something, and then we see the words, "You can't." Okay, so simple as. William Afton killed the children at the Dead Child incident, which is why when we were trying to save them, he says you can't. But then again, why does he do this? Well, maybe he needed more fodder for his experiments. Now, this goes into possible motives for the missing child incident, which we similarly don't have clear or at least confirmed motivations for. And I'm going to say this right at the top, because I can hear some of you already being annoying. Arguing about what motive William Afton had to kill children in this franchise is not saying that there is any reasonable justification for doing what William did. Obviously, there is no reasonable or moral justification for what William Afton did, but even the most sick and twisted villains out there have an internal morality. In their own minds, what they are doing makes sense for their reasons. So when we're trying to find a motive for William Afton, we're trying to find his reasoning. Why does he do this? Sure, he could just be killing people to kill people, but he's a crazy scientist. Clearly, there's likely going to be a motivation behind his actions. So if you subscribe to the belief that he did the missing child incident in order to see if possession was something that is possible, then this can start to make sense a little bit, and I'm partial to this theory. The idea that maybe after the bite of 83, he saw Golden Freddy moving in some strange ways. So to try to replicate that, he kills children and puts them in animatronic suits to see if he can induce a possession. So maybe that didn't work and he's trying it again at the FNAF 2 location. But then, if that's the case, why is he doing it out in the open? And why is he leaving the bodies strewn about? Wouldn't it make more sense to continue to stuff the bodies into suits? And it's not like they wouldn't fit. Yes, the toys are a little smaller, but they're still big enough to fit a child in their chest cavity. And he was so secretive and careful with the missing child incident, it seems strange that he's suddenly flippant and out in the open with the Dead Child incident, so much so that it closes the restaurant he opened to do this experiment. Well, to be fair, we don't know that he opened this restaurant, and that seems unlikely. A lot of fans think that the FNAF 2 location was opened by Henry. If that's the case, then William Afton doing this to spite Henry and close the location is possible. We know that at this point it's likely William Afton hates Henry Emily and partially blames him for the death of the crying child. Not to say he cares about his children, but it's still an annoyance to him. So it's possible that William Afton was trying to prove that no matter what Henry tries, he cannot get away from William Afton. He will be there to ruin whatever he wants to try to do. But that's also not without its issues, because I don't think Henry Emily owns the FNAF 2 location. When things start going really bad, Phone Guy tells us that they're trying to get into contact with the original restaurant's owner, Fredbear's Family Diner, but they can't even seem to get a hold of him, and it seemed like he could barely remember the name of the restaurant. So it seems like he's not familiar with Henry Emily at all, which leaves us with two options. Either Henry Emily is not the owner of the FNAF 2 location, or he's using some weird pseudonym, which is pretty hard to do, legally speaking, when you're running a business. It's one thing to get hired for a week under a fake name, but to own and operate a restaurant is a lot trickier. Not to mention, if Charlotte Emily is dead at this point, why is he even reopening another Freddy's? He's got no skin in the game anymore. It doesn't make sense for William to open a restaurant just to get it closed, and it doesn't make sense for Henry to open this restaurant in the first place. At this point, I don't even think either of them owned the FNAF 2 location. Neither William nor Henry owned FNAF 2.
She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
One of the hottest debates in the fandom right now is who is the current CEO of Fazbear Entertainment, at least up until about halfway through Security Breach, where it seems that Glitchtrap begins taking over the online communication and posing as this digital CEO. Who would possibly own and operate this doomed brand in the modern era? Well, that's a great debate to have, especially since in Security Breach, as pointed out by several other theorists, it's an LLC. But at this early in the franchise, it's incorporated. It's a separate business. We can see this on the FNAF 6 paperwork, and we can see it in other trademarks throughout the game. As far as I'm aware, all of this debate has been under the assumption that Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated is a private company with sole or co-ownership. But what if it isn't? What if Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated is a publicly traded business, beholden to shareholders? Quick Business 101 for those who don't know or don't live in the US and don't have to listen to US laws about this. Maybe it's the same laws in other countries, I don't know, I'm American, I barely know how to do research for American business laws. Regardless, in the US, where FNAF is located, there are two major categories of companies, public and private, and a lot of other types of businesses can fall under either category. But the main difference of public and private, and the pertinent idea for this video, is that a private company is completely owned by a single person or select group of people. They have proprietorship of that company, whereas ownership of a public company is derived heavily by its stocks. Anyone can buy stocks of a public company so long as you can afford said stock. And ownership of the publicly traded company is made up of what is called shareholders, the group of people that own the majority of the stocks of said company. If I buy 1% of Apple stocks, which I do not have the money for, but if I did, then technically I own 1% of Apple. But even if I own that 1%, they don't really gotta listen to me. And legally, as far as I'm aware, you don't have to actually listen to your shareholders. They just reserve the right to stop funding your company. Essentially, and forgive me if I'm getting some of this incorrect, feel free to correct me in the comments below. I'm an English major. This was all new to me and I had to do a lot of research just for this one aspect of the theory. I learned how to write an essay. I don't know how to do any of this. According to the research I did to understand this, essentially if some big billionaire buys up 60% of my company's stocks, I can use the funds they've allocated into that stock to fund the company and make it bigger and better. It's similar to investing money into a company to help it succeed. But the reason that that big billionaire now has some control over me isn't like a legal contract. I don't have to do what he says. The thing is though, he doesn't have to fund my company. If I piss him off too much, he can just leave, sell his stocks and be gone. And suddenly I don't have all that investment that he put into the company. I'm out of money now. So I really want to do what this guy wants me to do. And that's where shareholders have control over a company. I'm pretty sure. Again, I did like a week of research for this. And if you want to reward that effort, you should drop a subscribe. If you like more thorough investigations on horror games, I do a lot of FNAF, but I'm trying to do not just FNAF moving forward. So back to FNAF. The only time I could find that ownership is directly mentioned in this franchise is that FNAF 2 quote, when they say they're going to try to track down the owner of the original restaurant. And what if that's the key here? There have been a lot of hints toward this throughout the entire franchise and we've just been missing it. The FNAF 1 newspaper mentions seeking out a buyer. The FNAF 2 newspaper mentioning that they're keeping the original animatronics to eventually reopen down the line. If Fazbear's has been a publicly traded company, depending on how they filed for bankruptcy, all of this suddenly makes much more sense, and it comes down to business law. Game theory actually talked about ownership in the past, with the fact that the modern Fazbear games showcase that it's Fredbear's Entertainment LLC now, which means that in some way Scott is definitely paying attention to the types of business law being used in this franchise. So let's do a very quick Freddy Fazbear's timeline to figure out what is going on at FNAF 2 and why. But not about William or Henry or any of those schmucks, about the business side of the company. I mean, we'll mention Henry and William along the way, but we're focusing on the business side of things. So I present to you the business timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's. Sometime in the late 70s or early 80s, William and Henry establish and own the private company Fredbear's Family Diner to great success. They want funding to create bigger and better things and expand the brand to more people, but they can't afford it with the money they're getting just from Fredbear's alone. They need funding. So they establish a separate business entity, Fazbear Entertainment. This is why the name is different from Fredbear to Freddy Fazbear. Separate business entities. It's a win-win scenario. Either this new venture is successful and they're wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, or at the worst case scenario, it goes fully under, Fredbear's Family Diner is fine. That is a separate business entity. Fazbear Entertainment goes under, we wash our hands and declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy, selling all of those assets back to the market. I should go into this as well because this is incredibly important for this theory, surprisingly. There's two main types of bankruptcy you can declare in the US as a business. There are more types, but the two main ones that are important for today's video are Chapter 7 bankruptcy and Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Chapter 7 bankruptcy is essentially a sell-all process, where whoever is in debt sells all of their non-exempt assets from the company to use that money to pay back who they're in debt to, and typically the remaining amount is forgiven. It's basically, we fucked up, here's everything we did, and that's as much cash as we can give you back, see you never. Chapter 11 is more often used in businesses where there's an attempt to continue the business after bankruptcy. There's an agreement made between all of the debtors and debtees. Essentially, the people who owe the money go, hey, here's all the stuff you've invested into the company and all of the assets we bought with the money you gave us. You can hold on to that, we'll reorganize the company, and maybe we can reach a new agreement later down the line. It's a way to maintain a business through a bankruptcy. Hi, this is VoiceOver Riley. It's probably going to sound a little better. Anyway, I was editing this and I just realized, according to uscourts.gov, a Chapter 11 bankruptcy is frequently referred to as a reorganization bankruptcy. This is important because the FNAF 2 newspaper, and I just noticed this in editing, literally says the original characters are being kept in hopes of a possible reorganization of the company. This newspaper is literally directly saying they're doing a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, meaning Scott was thinking about things like this all the way back then. Either that or this is a crazy coincidence. It's incredibly important for this theory, I promise, and it'll be important later. Eventually, William and Henry find enough investors and funding for first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to open, and Freddy's and the gang are legally owned by the major shareholders of the company, the investors putting the most money in, not being legally owned by William or Henry. They only retain ownership of Fredbear's Family Diner and its characters, the separate business entity. Then the Bite of 83 happens, and eventually Fredbear's Family Diner is shut down because of it. At this point, no way would the shareholders want the public image of Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated to be besmirched by declaring ownership of the company to either of the businessmen who just had a public children's death happen in the middle of their restaurant. Sure, they can continue to be the minds behind the creation of these animatronics and the engineers, but they are not touching a leadership role of Fazbear Entertainment. William then begins creating a separate business venture, Circus Baby's Pizza World, and through it needs to create a new business entity, Afton Robotics, again seeking out funding. It's my belief that William Afton, after seeing the Bite of 83, either because he noticed Fredbear acting strange or just wanted to experiment with the concept of life, wants to recreate that bite with the Funtime animatronics. He seeks out additional shareholders for that new business venture, and this is where we get that sister location cutscene from. It was an application to the shareholders to show the proof of concept of Circus Baby, but of course that restaurant goes under before it ever happens. Now there's just a roster of Funtime animatronics that William is stuck with, because this business entity was attached to his name, Afton Robotics. He's the proprietor. At this point in the timeline, Henry either disappears not to be heard from again, or William Afton pins the next thing he does on Henry to get Henry arrested. Depends on what you believe. But William Afton, still wanting to experiment with possession, does the missing child incident to see if anything would happen. It's not his business anymore, so it really doesn't matter if it gets shut down. Just put the dead children in the animatronics and see if they possess them. But alas, William doesn't notice any possession, and within a year, that place shuts down. But something worse happens. Since Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated was set up as a separate business entity owned majorly by the shareholders, when Freddy Fazbear Pizza goes under, if those shareholders decided on a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, William Afton would no longer retain ownership to any of the assets of the company. Those are now owned by the investors while they reorganize the business trying to move forward. To put it simply, William Afton lost access to his experiments. The Freddy's animatronics, holding children's bodies, are held securely away from them. He needs to study them to see if any kind of possession will work, but he can't get any access to them without an active Freddy's location. So after a year or so, he approaches these shareholders with a grand idea for a new Freddy's that can get them out of bankruptcy and be safer than ever before. William promises a criminal database scanning on all of the animatronics, state-of-the-art security. Nothing could ever go wrong at this place, and to sweeten the deal, he just happens to have a spare balloon boy from Circus Baby's Pizza World, never before seen by the public. They can even throw that in as a brand new animatronic. The shareholders agree, and the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is opened. Finally, William Afton can observe and experiment on those older animatronics again, occasionally taking pieces of them and attaching them to the toys to see if they can get any reaction. But are they possessed? He needs to see if they'll act strangely. But after some time, they're still not reacting, and William Afton grows desperate, knowing if this restaurant shuts down again, he will once again lose access to these observations. Something has to make them move. If they're possessed, something needs to trigger a reaction. Why not remind them how they got there? As a Hail Mary to absorb any sort of motion, William puts on the old Spring Bonnie suit that he killed them in and kills a new roster of children right in front of them. That got a reaction. As he's doing this, the marionette goes off its track to get the old Freddy animatronic for help. Save them, it begs. And William Afton sees the marionette and that old Freddy animatronic marching toward him. And in that moment, he got everything he's ever wanted. Undeniable proof that possession exists and can be manipulated. But it's not without its consequences. The animatronics have been driven mad at this point, and by the time of the last private party of the FNAF 2 location, they're too erratic. One of them even attacking an employee, severing his frontal lobe. The Freddy's location closes down, and once again, the animatronics are kept for safekeeping. But the toys are scrapped. They don't want to be associated with William's new creations, which is fine by William. Those toys have several parts of the old original animatronics, and he can start to get to work. This even explains Follow Me if it's true, because the next time a Freddy's location opens and closes, William Afton knows that those animatronics will get locked away if left for too long. So in that moment, he's desperate enough to rush in and try to disassemble them himself before they're taken away. I think this is a perfectly rational explanation for the DCI, the Bite of 87, Follow Me, and the intro for Sister Location. And I think it slots in perfectly for the timeline of William and Henry. I'm so confident about this, but what do you think? Do you think the DCI was a way to try and provoke a reaction from the animatronics in the little time that William had access to them? Or am I looking way too much into the legal nuances of fake businesses?